extrem. Veja bom.
Good afternoon and greetings from Landsverk. Welcome to the first and hopefully not the last tunnel vision event in Shetland, and thank you for joining today. Today's event is about bringing together the community and having a community conversation on fixed links to explore what some of the benefits are and challenges for individual communities, as well as for Shetland as a whole. Fixed links is a topic that's been discussed for many years, and some may say for too many years. And Alistair and I wanted to bring communities together to have the opportunity to learn from the expertise and knowledge of those who have been involved in delivering tunnels, and for you to have the opportunity to ask any questions that matter to you. So to set the scene for what the event will involve today, we have 3 speakers, and there will be a Q&A after each presentation, followed by a general Q&A at the end. We'll hear first of all from Councillor Thomson on the current position with the Council. Then we'll hear from Professor Andy Sloan, who's 35 years experience of delivering tunnels around the world and was also involved in the Llr to press a tunnel feasibility study. And finally, we'll have a presentation from Sigurd Lamhaughe from Landsverk, which is the institute under the Ministry of Finance in the Faroe Islands. We often look north to our neighbours with admiration at what they have achieved in terms of connectivity, so it'll be good to hear firsthand the Faroese experience and how tunnels have impacted their islands. So this is an interactive event via Facebook and YouTube, so feel free to comment on either platform. We'll be running polls throughout the event, and you'll be able to answer those on Facebook and YouTube. Our staff will be gathering comments and questions throughout, and hopefully we'll be able to feed them into the broadcast today. But if you don't wish your comments or name to be featured on screen, then please make that clear. Once the event's over, the links can be shared with friends and family, and you can watch the video at your convenience. Alistair's going to chair this session, so I'll hand over to you now, Alistair.
Okay, thank you very much, Beatrice, and good afternoon, everybody. Now, as Beatrice just said there, we're trying to make this as interactive as possible, so please, as many questions and comments as possible on the Facebook feed or on YouTube, and we will try, when it comes to the question and answer session following each presentation, to build these in. Now, we've also got some polls running. Now, before everybody gets too excited, these are just as they like to say in question time, a bit fun. So we're not pretending that they're scientific. They don't need to be representative of anything other than the people who have turned up and chosen to take part in the poll today. But the first of these polls is now open, and I'll tell you what the outcome of that one is after we've heard from Thomson, who will be our first speaker. And the first question is the simplest one. You know, this is not a new debate for us. You will come to this debate doubtless with your own ideas and your own preconceptions. So do you want to see tunnels as the future transport option for the Isles in Shetland. You can vote on that now on Facebook and on YouTube, and we'll tell you what the balance of opinion is at the end of Ryan's presentation. We'll repeat the question again at the end of the session, and we'll maybe take some other polls as we go. So, without any further delay, I'm going to hand on to our first presenter today, somebody who needs no introduction to a Shetland audience, Ryan Thomson, councillor for the North Isles and Shetland. So you've got Cllr, Unst, Yell, Walsa, Skerries, Ryan, and also, more importantly, perhaps for the Shetland-wide discussion, also chair of ZTrans. So, Ryan, can I just hand over to you, and you're going to give us the current situation with regard to council thinking in relation to the construction of fixed links. So, Ryan.
Super. Thanks very much, Alistair, and thank you, Beatrice, as well, for arranging this Tunnel Vision discussion event, and thank you for allowing me to introduce the SIC and ZTrans position on fixed links. I'm here to give a brief outline of our position as it stands, what has been done over the recent past, what has been worked on, what has worked and what hasn't worked, and what we can do going forward to what we believe will make fixed links a reality for West here in Shetland. Firstly, what is crucial and critical is political buy-in. I know Beatrice's positive position on fixed links from her time in the council, and it's obviously a huge plus to have an MP on site to look at the merits, the costs, the challenges, and how we overcome these. For the last 5 years, at the very least, the SIC and ZTrans has been engaging with the Scottish Government and Transport Scotland through processes that they have been carrying out, including the Regional Transport Strategy and most recently the Strategic Transport Projects Review 2, or STPR2. These have been frustratingly lengthy conversations, and only relatively recently has it been confirmed, I think, that the Scottish Government won't bear fruit on fixed links in the short to medium term, and for the reasons for that are complex. Shetland is in a bit of a catch-22 situation. Shetland has fallen down the cracks when it comes to fixed links, and this is why. The STPR2 was defined by Transport Scotland as the Scottish Strategic Transport Network, which in simple terms means that the network, that is the responsibility of the Scottish Government and Transport Scotland. However, where the problem lies with that is that the interconnectivity between our islands, our internal islands here in Shetland, is the responsibility of the SIC and ZTrans. And this is the reason why feasibility studies are being commissioned recently for specific islands in the Hebrides and not in Shetland in the recent STPR2 announcement. There were other islands that fell through this loophole too: Orkney, parts of Argyll and Bute, and Highland Council. It's a loophole that we feel must be closed off soon for fixed links to have any credible and realistic future. We remain committed to discussions with the Scottish Government, and of course we will continue to engage positively in presenting our case. The Shetland Islands Council has deemed fixed links unaffordable to the Council. Therefore, the position of the Council up to now is that we require support, both in terms of finances and funding and otherwise, from either the Scottish Government or the UK Government. Within the SIC, fixed links remains policy, something I personally intend to firm up in the coming months prior to the period before the election in May. We're also working on the Shetland Transport Strategy, which is a new strategy, which is currently under development, and fixed links will feature heavily within that. The next steps in terms of dialogue with the Scottish Government, we will respond to the STPR2 consultation, which I believe will be coming to the committee cycle in March, and we will also feed into the upcoming Islands Connectivity Plan, which is a year overdue now. This delay is a shame, but it's obviously entirely understandable given the demands COVID has placed on all parties over the last year, which has impacted progress on just about everything. fixed links must be bumped up the agenda. I've said that before, and it's absolutely crucial that it is, because although we as a local authority and a transport body in ZTrans are responsible for the inter-island connectivity, we cannot afford to look at any of the options available to us, be them fixed links or replacement vessels, without government assistance. Nor do I think anybody would expect that significant burden to be placed on any individual local authority without the government support and assistance. So that outlines up to now where we are, but where do we go from here? Locally, we need to firm up that SIC position. As I've said before, it's too non-committal for my liking. We have 4 islands in which fixed links are absolutely feasible, in Onst, Yell, Walser and Bressa. Conversations like this one we are having today with the community are absolutely crucial and vital to establishing local dialogue around fixed links, which in itself is crucial. We must now look at all avenues open to us. We simply cannot continue to put all our eggs in one basket, which we probably and possibly have done up to now, particularly when the owner of that basket appears so reluctant to engage. We must start to open up new conversations, I feel, with all parties, including the UK government, around how they could possibly support infrastructure investment within Shetland. We also need to be looking at seeing what conversations we can have with the commercial sector, who may benefit from fixed links or who are potentially burdened by the current ferry service and its limitations. We could explore the creation of an arm's length commercial entity akin to the likes of Carmichael or Hyal, through which we could explore funding avenues in which local authorities would not. Every and all options must be considered because we are now at a critical juncture. We only have to look at as far as the critical ferry situation on Balsa's side this week, with ageing vessels requiring more and more maintenance and repairs. It's leaving islanders potentially cut off at worst or at best without a competent, resilient and reliable ferry service. There is high frustration around fixed links locally, and we need to address these by overcoming the difficulties in getting government to respond whilst exploring all avenues. That lies with us as a local authority and with us as a transport body, responsible for upping our game and bringing a strong and developed case to governments. And we have to be clear and honest with ourselves at the Council. That involves us investing in our part into developing information, facts, figures and business cases. That's our next steps, and that must happen now, yesterday, if possible. Again, thanks for allowing me to speak. I look forward to hearing other contributions on the matter, and of course, I'm more than happy to answer any questions now or throughout the event as they may arrive. Alistair, thank you.
Ryan, thank you very much indeed. Now, the poll that we have been running, and I'm delighted to say that we're well north of 100, we're maybe touching about 115, 120 viewers at the moment. The poll that we've been running on Facebook says 97% in favour and 3% against. On YouTube, 96% in favour and 4% don't know. So, as I say, don't read too much into it. It's representative of nobody other than those who take part and want to take part in the poll, but interesting nonetheless for that. Now, Ryan, we've had a lot of people emailing in ahead of today's session. There's been one fairly common recurring theme that you'll not be at all surprised to hear is, yes, we want this, can you get on with it? But you said there, and I think you're absolutely right there, that we need the political buy-in. Now, we did actually ask Transport Scotland if they would take part in this today. He finally came back to us at 25 to 6 last night and in a 4-paragraph letter said, please go away, we're not really interested. But look, we'll pick that up with them, because we need everybody at the table here. You'll have seen this week the comments of Michael Grove in relation to the Levelling Up Fund. So I think we talk to anybody that we can get the interest from. But one of the things that you'll have heard, Ryan, and we hear from time to time, is that the council should be doing this from their own reserves. Now, can you talk us through why that's not the council position here?
Yep, certainly, Alistair. The council position, well, I suppose it's twofold. We could look at it from a purely financial perspective, and something as significant an investment and risk as a subsea tunnel or a fixed link of any sort, I don't think is possible from a local authority perspective. Any local authority across the country, I don't think, would or should be expected to undertake such a thing. The risks are so significantly high, as you can probably see in the significant optimum bias that you see in such an infrastructure project. It's upward of around 60% optimum bias. So the risk is significant. If it went wrong for a local authority our size, it could legitimately bankrupt us. Combine that with the fact that a fixed link of this sort needs to be something that a government should undertake. We look very enviously frequently at our neighbours in the northwest, and we'll hear from a representative of the Faroe Islands in this event. That whilst similarities are there, the significant difference is that they have their own government, they have their own borrowing powers, they have their own way of doing things, simply because they are an independent country in their own right. They're not a local authority like the Shetland Islands Council. Also, in terms of spending the reserves in general, obviously the Shetland Islands Council do spend their reserves every single year and plugging the gap on the revenue budget and delivering services. If we were to start spending that even more unsustainably as we are doing so now, we would need to be looking at what sort of level of services that we would be looking at reducing to plug that gap even further. The finance officer at the council comes with extraordinary graphs of even spending slightly more than what we are doing now, and those reserves will be depleted in a very, very short fashion, potentially within the next decade. So we need to be very careful about that. There are choices ahead, there are decisions that need to be made around spending our reserves, but if we are looking at and being realistic about the prospect of these 4 islands and getting fixed links over a period of say 10, 20, 30 years, then we need to start looking at avenues beyond our reserves and having proper bold conversations with both Scottish and UK governments, and as I said in my opening remarks, perhaps the commercial sector as well.
Okay, listen, thanks for that. That's a pretty comprehensive answer there. The other thing I want to put to you at the moment, and we'll bring you back into the conversation at the end when we've got the full panel, is that the other theme that came out from some of the emails we've received is that there will be losers in this as well. You know, in particular, people refer to the future of the people who currently work on the ferry crews, but also, you know, there are going to be implications for how this will affect the way the council provides other services like education, maybe social care. What thinking and what work's being done in the council about addressing these issues, if, as you say, you firm up the position to one of a more enthusiastic and full-throated support for fixed links?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a legitimate point, one that I'm sure people raise with yourself and Beatrice as well as they do with us at the Shetland Islands Council. I suppose my example would be for those who are scared about school closures and amalgamation of health provision, etc. You only need to look as far as Bur Isle, who had a fixed link, the anniversary, I think it was the 50th anniversary just recently of them acquiring a fixed link through Cllr and onto the mainland, and the island is thriving. They've got their local school, shops, the community. They've still got that island feel. In terms of school closures or anything like amalgamation of things like that, I think we would need to take one step at a time and try and firm this up and see if we can acquire fixed links. I don't think that because of a fixed link between islands that necessarily means the change of provision of services in any way if that level of service is there that is required. Well, we look at Burra again. We look at Muckle Row and all these different types of islands that are still very much islands and very much still self-sustaining. But we need to move with the times, and we need to obviously establish that these 4 islands that we highlight that are feasible for fixed links should be absolutely looked at, and that vessels are increasingly becoming obsolete for these types of islands. Ferries are fundamentally the really an exclusive form of transport that acts as serious barriers both from a socio-economic perspective, an educational perspective, and an economic perspective. So far from any negatives that may come out of fixed links, I can only see positives.
Okay, Ryan, thank you very much indeed for that. I'll just pick up one comment from the comments. Gary Robinson, who I think probably should know a bit about this, observes, isn't the short answer simply that the Council's reserves are being overspent already? So thank you, Ryan. We'll come back to you, as I say, at the end, but we're going to move on now to our next presenter, who is Andy Sloan. We've heard already from Beatrice a bit about Andy's background. He will be familiar to some in Shetland from the work that he did previously in relation to the Port Authority study of a fixed link from Lerwick to Bresa. And Andy has a substantial background as an engineer and is also a visiting professor at Strathclyde University. So, Andy, you're very welcome. We would have liked to have had you in Shetland in person, maybe for the next one, but you're very welcome, and I'll ask you please to give us your presentation. Thanks.
Thanks, Alistair. Yes, it would have been nice to come up to Shetland again. I'm here in Arran again, stuck with no ferries. But so I can't see my presentation. I'm sorry. That's it. Yes. So my background's in tunnelling, and I'll say from the outset, I'm not here today to advocate the building of tunnels. Covey, I'm a managing director of Covey, it's a Danish consultant in the UK. I'm here as a specialist to add to the conversation and to answer questions that you may have. At Covey, we specialise in crossing large bodies of water, be it in tunnel, immersed tube, or indeed bridges. But my background is 35 years in tunnelling in the UK, involved in some of the largest tunnelling projects that are currently going on in the UK, and 2 or 3 of those are crossing bodies of water. Can I have the next slide, please? So, is building these tunnels technically feasible? And the answer is, of course they are. The debate really has moved on beyond whether the actual construction process is feasible or not. The rocks are in Shetland, and indeed most of Scotland, are suitable for potential fixed link crossing by tunnelling, and the technique that would be used probably is drill and blast tunnelling, and that's a picture on the right hand side of a machine that, and the process is to drill holes in the rock, pack them with explosives and blow in a very controlled manner and progressively move forward, always checking the ground in front of us, so that the process is inherently safe. So the skills are available within the UK and in Scotland. This drilling and blasting technique will be used on the Corriglass hydroelectric project with SSE. I've just announced a huge investment in drill and blast tunnelling in the Great Glen. So in summary, the whole technical feasibility of constructing such tunnels under the seabed around Shetland is entirely possible, no different than the Faroes or indeed up the west coast of Norway. Can I have the next slide, please? So, but why would we do it? So, as an engineer, it's not just about developing and building things. We get involved in the why. Why do we build things? And that's inherent within the civil part of civil engineering. So, from looking at the development of these types of links, there's definitely an encouragement for younger generations to move to islands and rural areas and to help local economies flourish. It also helps with social mobility and the much mooted levelling up agenda that is taught by politicians at the moment. They are resilient against the effects of adverse weather and demonstrably they will improve journey times and ensure that those living in rural communities have access really to the same opportunities as those in perhaps more urban areas. And the records show that there can be substantial economic and social benefits to improving such links. And we'll hear from Sigmund later on about the positive benefit they've had in the Faroes. And at Covey, we're involved in constructing bridges and tunnels up the west coast of Norway, and that's a similar terrain to Scotland. And the improved interconnectivity is apparent from the construction of these things. There's also potentially an enhanced improvement in the business environment and opportunities where people can establish and build businesses in their preferred location. The nature of these fixed links as well is that in the overall drive for carbon neutrality in 2045, which is a legally binding commitment made by the Scottish Government, 2050 in the UK, such tunnel fixed links can indeed have a big contribution to that, particularly if they're linked with a good EV, electric vehicle charging network. So they're arguably a low carbon alternative to other forms of transport. But again, I see them as part of an overall mix in transportation. Importantly, the construction of tunnels have a minimal environmental impact, no impact on aquatic life, and of course are not visually intrusive. One of the detractors between the recent study between a fixed link between Scotland and Ireland, the tunnel came out trumps in that just because the bridge has such a huge carbon footprint that it couldn't be taken forward. Of course, whole scheme was politically driven and ended up being scrapped. But I think the community and the wider folk involved need to really think about whether they want this and really understand that building these fixed links does change the sense of place in a set of islands like Shetland. They're permanent and it will permanently change things. So many people think that it's an extremely positive thing and others will be less confident. And I would urge that conversation, that's really what Alistair and Beatrice have said about today. And I know the conversation has been long and at times fraught in Shetland over these. I remember well the conversations around the Bressa link, which I was developed early plans for. So I think the sense of place element of this is extremely important, and everyone's involved in conversations such as this. So why do it? Broadly and demonstrably, there are societal benefits from the construction of these tunnelled fixed links. In the round, we can build them as engineers. They're relatively straightforward pieces of engineering. We understand the risks. So the debate is really on what I call the softer issues and the benefits of these things. We shouldn't get hung up on whether technically we can build them. It is all of these why do it points that I've put on this page and I've just been talking about. These are the areas for the conversation going forward. Can I have the next slide, please? So the way forward, if tunnels are wanted, it will require a change in philosophy. One based on a vision that sets aside viewpoints of the past and looks at our close neighbours to the north, primarily, Faroe and Scandinavia. It comes down to really a political appetite to do this. The focus is quite often on engineers. Is it feasible or not? It's politicians that have to say that it is feasible and there is an appetite for it. Many councils have a strong ambition to improve transport links, as is required of them, particularly in rural and island communities. But as Councillor Thomson has said, the resource and ability, not just from a financial perspective, but from a technical and a leadership and a project management perspective, isn't necessarily there in councils to execute these multi-million-pound infrastructures. So the backing from governments is essential. But really, as Councillor Thomson said, it is, I think, for the council, for the local people to make the case, decide whether they want to go for this or not, and take it to government. And I know that SIC officers have been working hard in this space, and indeed, if I look around the UK and the other Scottish councils, the Shetland Island Council officers know an awful lot about tunnelling because they've been looking at it for so many years. Cost, of course, is often always talked about, and in simple terms, we are unlikely to replicate the reported cost in the Faroes or Norway. We can drive the cost down when we compare them to other tunnelled links in the UK, because what we would build here is not the Clyde Tunnel. It's not the Lower Thames Crossing Tunnel, which I'm working on, or Silvertown tunnels in London, which we're working on, which are geared to many tens of thousands of vehicles a day, and the number of vehicle crossings dictates the complexity of the control systems, etc., within the tunnel and the tunnel lining. So there is no need to have that level of sophistication. Indeed, we can replicate what the Faroes have done. So the look and feel of these tunnels would be more Faroese than Clyde Tunnel. But in terms of the cost, and it's a very complicated thing to why can't we just replicate exactly the costs that are in the Faroes? Well, the planning process in the UK is quite rightly a widely consultative process, and we have to assess the impacts of society and the environment. This takes time and it takes money, but everyone has a say through the process. The availability of experienced contractors is well, we demonstrate at the moment on the Cllr Glass project in the mainland that there is a huge appetite for tunnelling in Scotland. But when we compare it to Norway, for example, there are a huge number of specialist contractors, and all they do is build these tunnels. And the contracting and procurement and contracting environment is very different there than it is here. And that's not easy to change in the UK. There's issues with insurance and how we insure things, design standards, and there's a tax on spoil in the UK, quite rightly so. And when we deposit the risings, the broken rock that comes out, there's a tax to be paid on that. And of course, the ownership of the seabed as well, there would be a cost associated with that. So I think higher costs on the Faroes, but not as high as elsewhere in the UK for comparative crossings, because we would essentially develop a UK or a Shetland approach to hard rock tunnelling to make tunnel fixed links under the sea. Can I have the next slide, please? So a short presentation. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm more than happy to take questions and answers. So in summary, it's technically very feasible. It is for this conversation and conversations like this to really galvanise and coalesce around a way forward for Shetland. And as engineers, we're here to advise, we're here to help in that process to answer questions. So thank you very much.
Andy, thank you very much indeed. One of the emails we got just a few days ago said that we should be bringing in somebody from Norway for their experience as well from the engineering point of view. So I'm delighted to note that you were able to cover that, because the notice we had, that was a kind of ambitious ask for us. Now, the discussion around fixed links really is about the future of Shetland, and we've been putting this out to some of the schools and the Isles that would be affected, and we've got a few questions that have been pre-recorded from pupils in Walsa and in Mid-Yell. So we're going to sprinkle them throughout the presentation this afternoon.
What will happen to the ferry and the ferry crews? What will happen to the school if we hit tunnel?
So 3 good questions there to kick off from Walsa School. And you'll see that it turns out, in fact, that the concerns of the young people in our schools are pretty much the same as those of the rest of the community as well. Now, Andy, I've got quite a few questions, so I'm going to crack on through this as quickly as possible. Just parenthetically here, I'll say that we're now touching, or maybe even over 150 participants between the 2 platforms, so thanks for that. That's a great response. We're really delighted to have so many people here. Can we maybe just nail one thing that we've got? And this came in a few emails in the last few days. And I've got one letter here from a lady in Unst who says, I understand from geological maps that a fault line runs through Yell Sound and another through Blue Sound. Given that earth movements can occur along fault lines, what would be the risks to the stability of tunnels crossing them? Andy, do you feel qualified to pick that one up from the engineering point of view?
Yes, absolutely. The tunnel linings that we would put in such tunnels would be modified depending on the encountered ground conditions. So we tunnel through faults on a regular basis throughout the world, and in extremely active environments, tunnels just been completed through the Bosphorus, for example, under the Bosphorus Sea in Turkey, and the lining there is designed specifically for the reality that there will be earthquakes. So in the case of Yellson and Blue Sound, the faults there, they would be substantial, and how they would manifest in the ground is a much deteriorated rock condition. So we'd have to enhance the support and probably inject cementitious material into the fractures to reduce the water inflow. But in the round, a tunnel is a safe place to be within an earthquake. It's essentially part of the ground. So I can give comfort and say that once we've tunnelled through the fault, the lining would be robust enough to take any potential movement and shock. And the chances of earthquakes in Scotland are very low indeed, but it would be part of the design and we would cater for it.
Yeah. I mean, there is some discussion in the chat that we've got about the possibility of a bridge instead of a tunnel for Blue Sound. Any thoughts on the relative merits?
I know that my bridge team would be delighted to look at it, but in reality, we would go through a process of looking at the most optimal solution once you've decided whether you want a fixed link or not. Generally, in everything we do now, we look at the carbon. We look at the amount of carbon that's generated from the construction process. And in general, bridges have a higher carbon footprint than tunnels. The other element of this is weather and visual impact. So technically, there's no doubt that a bridge could be constructed, but it's down to appetite for what people want. So from my perspective, the carbon, the potential cost, the environmental impact would all lean me personally towards a tunnel. But again, you would have to go through the whole process of assessing one against the other.
You touch on carbon emissions there, and I guess that's going to be one of the important features when we're talking to bodies like Transport Scotland, because of course the Scottish Government has fairly ambitious net zero targets set for themselves. The relative position of carbon emissions from fixed links to continuing use of ferries, has the work been done on that yet?
It's ongoing because there's a real appetite for change now, and I think that was obvious for those of COP26 in Glasgow. The drive forward, towards greener ferries in terms of ammonia or hydrogen or electric ferries is gathering pace in Scandinavia in particular, and I believe Orkney may have plans for a hydrogen ferry, an electric ferry. Yeah. So I think the carbon issue is not static. Every element of transport has to drive carbon out. And it depends on how long and over what time period we look at these things. So I would say that low carbon ferries as well as tunnels are all part of the mix, Alistair.
And you touched on it there in your presentation, actually. You said about marrying it in with a proper network of charging points for electric vehicles. So it would need to be part of an overall, much more holistic approach to transport policy. Andy, I've got quite a long question or comment and question here from Callum Clark. So I'll let you compose your thoughts for a second or two while I read it, but it's worth putting into you. And he says, a quick question for all of you, I suppose, is, as Ryan said, the way to get around the problem may be a joint public-private venture. A way to open that could be to involve a tidal power system, as has been done in Rotterdam and as is currently being done in Java, where a permanent bridge is used as a base for tidal props, which could be lifted out the water for maintenance on hydraulic rams. So, that's, again, taking a wider perspective of it. He goes on to talk about being suicide to try and find this from the council reserves, and speaks also about a quite simple route for a fixed link to Cllr through island hopping through the Mid-Yell area. And he observes also ferries currently doing the best they can in hard circumstances, but the age of the crews is still on the high side, and you will still need ferries to the outer outlying isles, so not all jobs would disappear. I would dread to think what the cost of a new ferry would be, especially as whatever it is made needs to be compliant to the new CO2 regulations. So, taking from that, the incorporation of tidal stream devices, which is another stream of work that's being done in Shetland and in Orkney, and two birds with one stone, essentially.
So it's a really interesting question, and it has been considered another transport investment in the UK. Take the Lower Thames Crossing at the moment, which is a massive £7 billion project. But the emphasis on that, and these are two of the third biggest TBM tunnels in the world. But there's definitely a move to look at the carbon that's generated on such projects and drive down the carbon through design. We can take 30 to 40% out of that. And then it's looking at the materials, Alistair, the cement and the steel, etc., and then how we build them. And in those latter three buckets, steel, cement and fuel for vehicles, there is a move to couple that with renewable projects. Whether it's renewable electricity to make hydrogen, for example, and using the hydrogen to power vehicles, or generating electricity and using electric vehicles, not really for muck shifting, but for other elements of the construction. So it is definitely on the agenda to look at coupling construction and renewable energy.
Right, and then we have a question from Stephen Leask, who says, would a cut and cover tunnel method be a possibility for Bresa to Lerwick? Would it be easier, cheaper, and more importantly, feasible? A bit of technical spec on that one.
So a cut and cover is basically digging a trench. So it wouldn't be cut and cover, it would be what we call an immersed tube, where you float out segments and you sink them into the North Sea. There's a huge project to link Denmark and Germany, which we're designing at the moment, called the Fehmarn Belt. The amount of concrete, the casting yards, the impact to the aquatic environment are all quite significant with that form of construction, Alistair. And a tunnel to Bresa is 1,500 metres long, 350 metres of it under the water. It's almost exactly the same length as the Clyde Tunnel. And from my perspective, that form of construction, as in drill and blast for that link, would be the cheapest and least environmental impact.
Okay, so I mean, essentially what you're describing there, I guess, is effectively it's like not so much a tunnel but a pipe sitting in the seabed. Is that right? It's
a series of shoeboxes, open-ended shoeboxes, and we float them out and we sink them onto the seabed, and then consecutive ones are dropped with millimetre accuracy, and then they're connected as a kind of rubber seal, complex rubber seal, and they butt up against one another, and you pump the water out of the seal. You pump the water out to sink them into place.
Right.
So,
now, take you back to this question about the comparative costs between construction here and construction in the Faroe Islands. I mean, I get that whatever we do here is going to have to go through the same regulatory system, planning and the rest of it, and our planning system is what our planning system is. We're not going to change that for tunnels. I was interested, though, in a few of the other variables that I wonder if they could be the subject of a more pragmatic discussion. Now, one of them was a tax on spoil. Is that the aggregates levy that you're talking about there?
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, the purpose of the aggregates levy was to produce some sort of taxation and benefit for communities surrounded by quarrying. Now, this would be very different. So, if you're producing aggregate here, would there be a case, do you think, for us to go to government and say, this is aggregate, but it's not quarried in the conventional sense of being taken out the ground for the sole purpose of being used in construction or whatever else, because actually the primary purpose is not to produce the aggregate's a byproduct?
It's an argument that one could exercise. I think it might be a hard argument to have. When the arisings the arisings are essentially spoil, so it's a tax on the spoil arisings from the tunnel. In other countries, when I tunnelled in Hong Kong, etc., when the spoil actually comes out, it has a value because it's being used in other engineering works. But on the general argument about cost, we had meetings with SIC and the Norwegian Roads Authority way back in 2010, 2011, and explored in detail the difference in costs and procurement processes between the UK and Norway. And there were some substantial differences around the types of contracts, the appetite to share risk with the contractor, what risk the owner takes and what risk the contractor takes, and really the availability of highly skilled contractors with dedicated plan to do this every day, all day, for years and years and years in a highly competitive market. So if we did a tunnel in Shetland, for example, it would be the first in the UK of this type, and it would be folly to think that we could get as cheap as the Faroes. But that said, Alistair, we could get substantially cheaper than the feasibility studies and actual report for other tunnels in the UK and the ones that are being constructed at the moment in the UK, if a sensible approach is taken.
Yeah, well, an interesting point of information here coming from Maurice Henderson, who says that the spoil in Faroe was reused to reclaim land and a fish factory was built on the site. And a comment coming from Orkney, I think, Josephine Jones asks, can the spoil from the tunnel be ground down for rebuilding roads? Presumably, in principle, there would be no reason for that.
It depends very much on the mineralogy and the makeup of those rocks. But it really, whoever called in about the reuse of Faroe, that's the kind of coupled construction that you're really looking to do.
And finally, you're looking at other sorts of connectivity as well. A tunnel can carry cars, vans, lorries, whatever else, and presumably it can also carry things like fibre optic cable for improving broadband connectivity.
Absolutely. So once you've created a hole under the seabed, you can put just about anything you want through it: utilities, power, fibre optics, communications. Yes, multiple. So there's a big drive in places like Finland and other parts of the world to build utility tunnels. So everything goes in the tunnel. It's a safe place, constant temperature, etc. So a good place to keep them.
And finally, we'll maybe come back to this one again in the end as well. Jamie Clett asks, what would be the difference annually, the maintenance costs between ferries currently and the tunnels that would cover the same routes, and what's the lifespan of tunnels compared to the ferries? So that kind of gets to the nub of the matter, doesn't it?
So in terms of the cost to run the tunnels, and Sigurd is coming after me, he has this at his fingertips, but I would anticipate something like £100 per metre of tunnel per annum, because people are needed and employed in the tunnel. We have to. No tunnel looks after itself, so people have to be employed to look after it. So there's costs of wages and vehicles, etc. There's ongoing maintenance in terms of pumping, but the rock is very old. It's very stable once we've put the lining in, and it's a very light lining that's designed to the rock itself is the tunnel. It supports itself with a thin shotcrete lining, a sprayed concrete lining. Once you've created a hole under the seabed, it's there for forever. But the design life that we would put in is either 80 to 120 years. But with maintenance, it keeps going. And we're working on tunnels that are 200 years old, canal tunnels at the moment. Excavated by
sometimes feels like the ferries might be heading for that sort of lifespan as well, but that's another story altogether. Andy, listen, I'm dangerously close to running this thing to being on schedule, so I'm going to give you a break here, and if you don't go too far, please, if you can, stay around for the final panel discussion that we have, and we'll go to our next presentation, hopefully all the techniques permitting. And our next presentation is going to come from Sigurd Lamhaughe, who's in the Faroe Islands at the moment, and that's where he's joining us from. He's the director of Landsverk, which oversees land-based transport infrastructure, and that includes tunnels in the Faroe Islands. Based in Tórshavn, it's an institution under the Ministry of Finance, but you are, I think, what in this country we'd probably call an arm's length body or a non-departmental body. So, Sigurd, you're going to talk us through a bit about the Faroese experience, how you got your tunnels, touching maybe on the financing of them, and we'll maybe then talk about how the tunnels in the Faroe Islands have changed what Andy spoke of there as being that sense of place. So, Sigurd, you've got your presentations, and the floor is yours.
There. Yes.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon from Tórshavn. I would like to extend my gratitude for being invited to speak this conference about this topic that is relatively important for us in the Faroes, and I'm sure for you as well. To me, this topic is especially relevant since I have been fortunate to be allowed to be a part of the teams constructing these subsea tunnels. Next slide, please. My presentation will focus on 4 topics. First, an overview where the subsea tunnels are located and why we build those. Build these tunnels. Second, a presentation of the most important social-economical impact. Third, a discussion of why the impact differs from various regions. And the fourth one, a presentation of how tunnels have been financed. We start with the overview. Next slide, please. The first subsea tunnel was Vagatunnelen, connecting the western area of the Faroes. Vagar is also the place where the airport is located, and it was opened in 2002. Next slide, please. The second subsea tunnels was Norjatunnelen, connecting the northern region called Norrajar to the main area, and it was opened 2006. The third tunnel is Estriatunnelen, which provides a new connection between the 2 islands of the main area, and therefore shortening the travel distance between 2 of the most densely populated regions in the Faroes. And it was opened in last year, December 2020. Additional to that is say that the island of Streymoy and Alistair were already linked together with a bridge, a fixed bridge in 1973. But that bridge is in the northern part of the islands, while the tunnels is in the southern part. The fourth tunnel, this tunnel is not finished yet. It was actually blasted through last Thursday, and it will be finished next year, December 2023. The fifth tunnel is only on the board, and the Landsverk have just finished a preliminary study about this tunnel, but it has not been politically decided yet. But if it is built, it will connect the island of Cllr to the main area. The price is very interesting, of course. It will vary somehow, and we have estimated with the background in the price of Sanda and Estriatunnelen that we had estimated the price and if we build Cllr tunnel today will be around 20 million English pounds per kilometer. A subsea tunnel to Cllr will reduce the travel time. The main reason why we build subsea tunnels is to reduce travel time. If you look at the southern region, the travel time with ferry is around 3 hours. Is illustrated by the blue line. Next slide, please. A subsea tunnel to Cllr will reduce the travel time by a third, around down to 1 hour, which also is illustrated with the yellow line. The map on the right, as you can see, show how tunnels are reducing travel time from the region to the capital city. In addition to reducing travel times, the tunnel also increase accessibility since the ferry only sails certain numbers of days, while the tunnel are always open. The main economical benefits from the tunnels are they integrate the labor market into one labor market for the whole Faroe Islands. Those subsea tunnels also and other tunnels as well create Faroe Islands to one business area. The general observation about socio-economic impact of the tunnels are that it has not been possible to measure any significant effect on the national economy. This means that we cannot detect any increased growth in GDP of the Faroe Islands. This does not mean that there's no effect on GDP, it is only means that we have not been able to separate and measure the effect from the tunnels from other factors that influence the economical activity. On other hand, we can see a strong impact from the tunnels on population, average age in the region, income level, and the reduction in unemployment. As we see, the size of the impact depends on socio-economic situation in the region and the region distance from the major city. We will now turn on to socio-economic impact on the region. Next, please. We will start with impact on population. As a general rule, the population in region that only are connected to the mainland by ferry connection tend to decline relative to the rest of the Faroes. The population in region of Suðuroy has been steadily declining throughout the period in a close linear manner. The region of Sandoy has also been declining in a linear manner. The region of Vágar has declined in a linear manner until the tunnel opening in 2002. After the tunnel opening, the relative population has stopped declining and been growing. After the tunnel opening into the north region of Norway, the declining stopped, but has been no significant increase in the relative population's size. Prior to the opening of the tunnel, the population was also declining, but to a lesser degree on the other region. Generally speaking, the impact is visible. The impact from the tunnels on the relative population in the region has been quite strong, but has differentiated in the two regions. We will turn to the impact on the relative age in the region. The average age of the population in Suðuroy has been around 8% higher than in the rest of the Faroes. The average age in Sandoy has been inclining through the period, where it started at being 2% higher than the average for 2% higher than the average for the country as a whole, and ended up being around 9 to 10% higher. It will be interesting to follow the development in Sandoy after the tunnel opening in December 2023. The average age of population in Vágar was around 6% higher than the Faroe as a whole until the opening of the tunnel 2002. After opening, the relative age has declined and now around 2% below the Faroes at whole. Reason is an influx of young families to the region. As you can see, the impact of tunnel on every age in Vágar has been quite strong. The average age in Norway was also higher than in the total population, and declining after the tunnel opening. So the situation was never as bad as in the other regions, since the average age was only 2 to 3% higher than the other country, higher than in the other places in the Faroes. The impact of the tunnel on the average age in Norway is still significant, but smaller in Vágar. We will end the social economic analysis by looking at the relative income per inhabitants. The relative income in Suðuroy, in the southern region in Suðuroy, has for a long time been less than 80% of the average income in the Faroes. The relative income in Sandoy has been fluctuating a lot, but has always been significantly lower than in the country as a whole. In recent years, it has stability around the level in Suðuroy. The relative income in Vagar was until 92 around 90% of the country average, whereupon it fell down to 85. Since the tunnel opening, it has steadily increased to around 93% of the country. As you can see, the impact of the tunnel on the relative income in Vagar has been quite strong. The relative income in Norway took a dive just when the tunnel opened because the target biggest fish factory in the Faroe Islands, Thomson, situated in Cllr, closed. After the relative income has increased and now is around the country average. We will now brief the impact of the tunnels are relative income. The impact of the tunnels on the relative income in Norway is smaller than in Vagar, but it's quite strong. We will now briefly discuss regional impact impact different. The size of the impact of the tunnel depends on two main reasons. First, the commuting time to the major economic center. Second is the social economic situation in the region prior to the tunnel. At 2011, there was a national census. People were asked about their commuting time. And you can see the result that the commuters in the Faroes tend or want to communicate at most 30 minutes to an hour. The tunnels reduced the commuting time to 30 to 60 minutes. This is probably the most important benefits of these subsea tunnels. The second reason in the social economic situation prior to opening the tunnel, the difference between Vagar is that the commuting time to Thomson, the capital city in the Faroes, is around 30 minutes from Vagar and more than 1 hour from Cllr each way. Addition, all social economic parameters were relatively worse in Vagar compared to Cllr. This seems to explain the difference of the impact from the tunnels, where the impact in Vagar was significantly stronger than in Norway. Before we went to social economic part of financing part, I will show you a picture from a decoration from the tunnels. I mentioned that I have been a part of this construction teams to construct these tunnels. As a project manager for Norway Tunnel, we spend a lot of time talking about how to prevent kit pranks, spray paintings and other things, setting up camera and so on. And I call it decoration to prevent the vandalism. It probably is a strong word, but anyway, we choose to change the mindset. Instead of have a dark, dumpy, foggy tunnel, we change the perception of the tunnel room into a beautiful space. And I got help from local architect Heidi Pols and the Fairies famous artist Sander Pedersen. And among other things, we installed exciting lighting of special area in the tunnels. The tradition with decoration has been continuing to the subcontinental tunnels. So we are very proud in the Faroes to have this very beautiful and colorful tunnels. Next slide, please. We will now turn on to look at how the tunnel are financed. The tunnels are organized as a private, public, independent, limited company that is owned by the government. The board members are elected by the minister, but there is emphasis on keeping the arm's length distance from the political system. and it is organized with a CEO and so on. Next slide, please. The first 2 tunnels were financed by 2/3 share capital from the government, which roughly was equal to the cost of building a new ferry. Instead of building a new ferry, the government put the money into the tunnel company. The rest was financed by loans, which is paid back by tunnel toll. There was no public guarantee for the loans, and the payback time was around 50 years for each tunnel. The loan is now paid back from both of the tunnels. Next slide, please. The 2 last tunnels were financed different Estrayer and Sandøya tunnel by around 20% in government shares capital. Again, the rest of the finance were financed by loan, which will be paid back by tunnel toll. There was a public guarantee for this loan, which reached in a lower interest rate. The payback time is set 25 years, which is longer than for the other 2 tunnels, but still is a quite shorter period, since many infrastructure projects in other countries are financed over a considerably longer period. The picture is on the right is one of the funny things we also did the Norway tunnel to make this space a little bit nicer. You can see the toll pay system is like an automatic cash cow, full automatic, where you pay the tunnel company, where you pay in when you're driving into to a company's homepage. The system automatically detects your license plate as you drive in the tunnel and subtract at the payment. Most of the vehicles in the Faroes have a subscription, which gives them a benefit of lower rate. The traffic in Vágar tunnel has increased substantially since the opening of the tunnel. Around 110,000 vehicles annually used the ferry before the tunnel opening, and relative to the first year after the opening, the traffic was threefolded, and after 5 years it was fivefolded. And you can see at the year 7 after the tunnel was built, 2019 is the higher, and 18 is 20. It's that you have a little fall in the traffic numbers is causing Corona. Next slide, please. The traffic in Norway increased even more dramatically. It increased fourfold the first 4 years and was sevenfold after 3 years. The increasing traffic allowed for lowering of the tunnel toll, and the price has steadily gone down. In 2003, the price of the tunnel tolling was set around the price that had been for crossing with a ferry. 5 years later, it was half of that, and today is less than 1/5 of what it used to be the price for a ferry crossing. Discussion today is whether the tunnel toll should be abolished or not. Thank you very much for your attention again. Thank you for us as an organization for inviting me to tell you about the tunnel in the Faroes. And I have to say special thanks to a guy, Brando, who's producing all these figures. Thank you.
Well, yeah, definitely pass on our thanks as well. Sigurd, thank you very much indeed. A lot of food for thought there. Some absolutely fascinating insights there to the Faroese experience. We've got a few sort of detailed questions that I think we can probably knock off quite quickly. What was the impact on emergency services? Can ambulances now be used instead of helicopters? so are taking people in and out of the smaller islands.
Yes.
They can, right. I think that's the answer for Helen Venus then. And Josephine Jones again asks, what is the height of the Fairies tunnels from the road surface to the roof? Does it allow for the tallest removable vans, lorries, etc.? My recollection from having been through them myself is that they do, but you could maybe tell us that for certain. Is it? There's no limit on the height of lorries. Yeah.
All these tunnels are built after what you say Norwegian standard. We use Norwegian standard when we construct these tunnels. Sorry.
No, sorry. On you go. I'm just anticipating the next question.
We use Norwegian standard because we don't have any Faroese standard for the use. So we use what to say the manner how they build this kind of subsea tunnels in Norway. So yes, they have traditional, also high tube trailers if you want that. Yes.
Okay. Now, Rory Irvin did ask, was the toll higher than the cost of the ferry fares? But in fact, you answered that. You set it initially at the same level as your ferry fares, but the increase in traffic allowed you to reduce that. Now, Deborah Nicholson says, what would happen if there were an accident that blocked the tunnel for a considerable amount of time? Presumably you do get accidents from time to time.
Lucky that we haven't had a lot of accidents, but we have a setup for how to manage that you can reach help from both sides. And if you need special help, we have a helicopter as well, so you can travel around.
Mm-hmm. Addition to Andy asks, sorry.
Now, Andy asked about one of the biggest benefits of this subsea tunnels are that the subsea tunnels are used as an infrastructure as well for telecommunication, energy, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Now, Callum Clark says, like trains, is a yearly ticket for use of the tunnel a viable option? Now, you explained that it's an automatic number plate recognition system, and I presume it's some sort of electronic payment then for the toll. But what are the opportunities for pedestrian and cycle use of these tunnels? Has it got to be vehicular?
No, that you can say on the land-based tunnels, we don't have signed that people with bicycle are prohibited, but we not recommend it. In subsea tunnel, it's forbidden actually.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Right.
Because
Now, can I maybe take you on to the economic development experience? The figures for Vagar were quite remarkable. Obviously, it was the first tunnel that you built, I think. And I do know, having visited myself, that you've seen significant development of the airport in Vagar recently. To what extent did one feed off the other? Did you develop the airport because you had the better connectivity? Or was that something that would have happened anywhere but maybe just somewhere else?
You can say one of the biggest driver of cars to Vagar is the airport. I did an analysis years back, and I think, as I said, every time a person fly through the airport, 0.41 cars driving through. So you have a limit like that. What's also interesting, especially in Vagar, that there have been a politics that to try to move, you can see, public office out in the region. And at the moment, we are also the main builder owner and for the Faroese government, and we built a house for the maritime authorities in the Faroes, and it's placed in Sandavåg. And what is fantastic that all the people, more than half of the people working at the office is high-skilled people live in this community. So you have also benefits that is possible to have you can say public office outside the main area.
Okay, now I've actually messed up a bit here. Hold my hands up. We were going to have a few more of the children's voices, and I think maybe if we can just bring them in now, we should do. And then at the same time, I'm going to open the second poll that we've got, which is about the impact of the possibility of this being a tolled service as opposed to a normal free road as we would not expect in this country, and whether that would make you more or less likely to want to take to see tunnels as part of our future development. So that poll will open now, and Sigurd, you can grab yourself 30 seconds for a quick sip of water because we're working you hard at the moment, and we'll hear a few of the children's voices. I think, again, this time still from Wishart.
Will there be a bike track in it? Would tunnels be safe?
Right, well, there you are. Short, sweet, and to the point. Is there anything in these questions as the community, when you were looking ahead to the development, what did you see as the opportunities? And would you say that tunnels have met your hopes, your aspirations for them? Have you achieved what you wanted to achieve by building tunnels?
I think so. That you have more a main area where concerning jobs, culture, young people, sport, and so. Yes, I think you have achieved that. So, and the mental distance with us as youngsters are much less than they used to be.
Mm-hmm. Tell me, one of the questions that we will probably want to discuss as a community would be the order of construction. What was it about Vágar that made that the first choice for a tunnel in the Faroes? You know, what was it that made you want to prove the concept there?
If you go back to the story, the councils in Vágar want to build the tunnels by themselves, and actually I think they did a company and actually started to dig and so on, and we had and it started around the starting of the 90s, and we had this recession in 92 that stops everything, and after that the government took over, and it was actually more a project for the whole government to do. Mm-hmm. But it was clear it was a very strong local initiative that started the Vágar tunnel.
So the demand was driven from the community itself.
In the beginning, and it was they want to build a tunnel, not as a standard as high as this is today, but it will be a tunnel anyway. But it will not fix and live up to the normal Norwegian standard that we build after today.
Okay, now can you give us a flavour, Sigurd, of the size of communities that we're talking about here in Vágar, Nordoy, Eshiroy, Suðuroy, and Sandaroy? Are these communities of hundreds or thousands or what?
In Vágar you have 3,000 inhabitants.
6,000 in North.
And in North you have 6,000. Norrojar you have 6,000.
Sandoy's got that probably.
Yeah, in Sandoy it's around 1,200 or something.
Mm-hmm. And Suðuroy, because that's the one you're still. That'll be the biggest challenge, I guess.
In Suðuroy you have around 5,000.
5,000. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. because that's significantly larger than the communities that we would be talking about building for here. Not that it necessarily makes that much of a difference, but it's a consideration, I suppose, as well. Now, can I just touch then on what Andy referred to as the sense of place? And that is that, you know, as an island that is part of an archipelago, but still, you know, that bit further removed from the main centre of population, what change, how much has it really changed what it means to live in Vaga or Nordøy or Eysturoy?
I think I mentioned in the slides that you have one labor market and one businesses. That means that I mentioned in Cllr, for instance, you had actually the biggest fish factory and the biggest workplace in Cllr went stopped, but there was no recession in the population, but you have a little recession in the income. And that means that small places are not that so vulnerable for small local changes in the labor market.
I mean, I was very struck when you said that the income level, was it in Nordøy, that sort of fell just at the same time as the tunnel opened, but that was because of the closure of the fish factory. Now, we see similar things happen from here from time to time. Go back a few years, quite a few years now, and you saw the withdrawal of the RAF, the Royal Air Force, from Uns. And that was a big economic shock on the community there. It sounds to me as if you get more resilience, you're able to build back faster with these better links. Now, I don't want to put too many words in your mouth, but is that a reasonable conclusion to draw from your experience?
Yes. You can see we had a big recession in 92. We had also a small recession in 2008. But you have had a workforce that was very free, and you could walk around, and you had also free businesses. So you healed very fast after this declining.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm looking for, we've got another question coming in here. Good one from Cheryl Jemison here. Does Sigurd think there are any negatives? So what would be the negatives that you identify?
If you look at the number of cars increasing the transport from when we, for instance, in Vaga, you had 110,000 cars driving, and you have a 9 folders. That possibility makes something with the environment that you will drive more. That's so. Mm-hmm. It have probably an impact on the environment, so long you're driving diesel and petrol cars. That's the only negative thing I can tell.
Yeah, because I mean, I have one quite lengthy, well-argued email here from a lady in Bresa, which is just across the water from where I'm sitting here in Lerwick, and she's concerned about the loss of community, the loss of amenities and jobs on the island, and making the case that there are safety issues, so that if you've got an increased volume of traffic, then inevitably your roads will be less safe. You will be expected to encounter the same problems as the more populous parts of Shetland. Have you seen, as it were, a spreading of the disadvantages as well as the advantages from the construction of tunnels?
Yeah. Like the more traffic or something.
More traffic. Yeah, you will have more traffic in this area. That means when there are more cars traveling through this tunnel, you will have more traffic. That's how it is.
For businesses, local businesses, say factories are which means.
But what is very interesting is that local businesses is not decreasing; they're actually growing.
Mm-hmm.
And you are probably afraid of small shop will close in Cllr and other places. But the difference, people like to go to Cllr and shopping actually. So, and but it means that there will be a competition, but you have to meet it somehow in the local area as well.
Sigurd, thank you very much indeed. We have, I think we've probably exhausted the questions for you just for the moment, but please don't go too far because we are going to come back in a minute or two to have a wider panel discussion to get the thoughts of the panel members of what they've heard, and also to get any more wide-ranging questions. And I will also have the results of the poll, which I'm looking at in my feed here, and I'm hoping that while we're listening to the children, somebody might come and tell me exactly what they mean, because I don't want to misrepresent the outcome of a poll. That's political death. So, do we have the opportunity to hear from the final tranche of children from Walsa and young people from Mid-Yell?
What place would get a tunnel first in Shetland? Could having a tunnel damage boats coming in and out of Walsa?
Who will build the tunnels for Walsa and where will they be built?
Hello, my name is Jasmine. I'm in S4 at Mid-Yell School, and my question is, will your car need to have an MOT to drive it in Yell once the fixed links are built?
Hello, I'm Isla, and I'm an S4 at the Mid-Yell School, and my question is, when will you start construction of the fixed links?
Hello, my name's Joe. I'm in S4 at the Mid-Yell School, and my question is, will you have to pass your test before you can drive unaccompanied in Yell?
Okay, different impacts, not just on the volume of traffic, but also on the need for full driving licenses and MOTs. You know, given the mess that DVSA is at the moment, that's maybe a legitimate concern for young people to have. The outcome of the poll is very interesting, and I confess this was not what I was anticipating. The question was, if tunnels were to be paid for by charging tolls, would you be in favour of their construction? Those who took part on the Facebook poll, 100% said yes. On YouTube, 89% said yes and 11% said no. So either way, pretty overwhelming amongst the people who took part. And again, it's entirely self-selecting. It's not representative of anything other than the people who have engaged in the discussion. But it doesn't seem as if, on the basis of what we have heard today, that the question of tolls would shift the dial that much. Certainly the point that I thought was very interesting from the presentation was the way, Sigurd, that tolls had actually come down as a consequence of the increased use. One question I might have asked, and I'll ask you this first, Sigurd, is it your organisation that controls the level of the toll, or is that controlled by the finance ministry or whoever else?
I told you that this our part, you say, is to planning this, and after the planning is finished, is go into a more or less a private public company, and I make sure that they have to keep the arm, and they decide the price and the responsibility for the loan and to pay the loan back. So it's up to them to decide the price level.
Okay. Now, one of the interesting features for me for what we heard from Sigurd was the change in income levels in the different communities that were then served by tunnels. I'm going to throw this one to Ryan and maybe Beatrice. Do we have that granular detail for income levels in Shetland at the moment, broken down even by ward level? Do either of you know?
I haven't seen that, but that doesn't mean to say we can't see if we can get it.
Yeah.
Ryan?
That's the sort of level of detail that I think that we need to start obtaining if we want to take fixed links forward in a serious manner.
Mm-hmm. Right, now, James Payton gets right to the heart of the matter here. He says, is the major enhancement of local devolved autonomy powers to Shetland not an absolute essential priority prior to moving on plans to fixed links? So, that's apparently addressed to Ryan, myself and Beatrice, but if Andy or Sigurd want to chip in, they'll be very welcome. My initial thoughts, James, are that the sort of sheaf of emails that we've got and are printed out here have a recurring theme, and it is that there's a determination to see this getting on, and I wouldn't want to see more barriers put in its place. But the fact that as a whole, you do need to have a greater degree of local autonomy, that you have to reverse this dreadful trend of centralisation, I think is one that you won't get much disagreement on. It's maybe the essay question of will we ever be able to make this work within the structures of government that are continuing to centralise. But Beatrice, Ryan, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there are several things that we could get on with the level of autonomy that we currently have. That's not to say, and people know my public opinions on being granted more local powers, both for Shetland and all local authorities. But in terms of what we can start doing now, I don't think that there is any real need for any further autonomy as it stands, whilst we continue to try and make the case for fixed links and press the government for the need on those. Yes, would a further more level of autonomy help in this case, in this instance, if we could raise more money locally through taxation powers or more fiscal control? Yes, absolutely. But we are where we are as it stands at the moment. That's not to say that obtaining any more powers from a local perspective can't be worked in line and in parallel with the work that we need to start doing for obtaining fixed links.
Beatrice, do you have any thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
no, I just don't want to see anything that's going to hold things up even more. And we've waited years to even get this far, so I wouldn't like to see any debate that held up that progressing.
Mm-hmm. I'm being prompted here that I should address the question about driving licences and MOTs, and the answer is that it wouldn't necessarily be automatic, but these exemptions are actually specified by name. You have to think, though, that in the event that we did build tunnels, that the case for them would be would maybe be a bit less solid than it currently is. So I wouldn't just guarantee that they would stay in the event that we got our tunnels. Now, Susan Edward comments, we agree Unstjell should be the first as we are the furthest away, the greater number of ferries needed and the most time wasted. So that's the perspective from Unst. Most people, I think, on the feed there's the view that Unstjell would be the obvious first steps. I'm guessing that because of the distances involved, it would probably be technically and economically more feasible as well. But let me sound a note of caution here. I think wherever we build it first, we want to be making the case, as they say, the proof of concept, and we don't want to be setting one island up against the other, because my experience is that when we do that, we all fail. I'm going to throw this one to you, Andy. Callum Clark asks, in a best possible scenario, what time frame would we be looking at for putting the first shovel in the ground? So we know it won't happen, but let's say, for argument's sake, tomorrow we got the agreement in principle to do this and we had the finance in place. When would we be able to start construction?
Assuming that you've got the money and everyone is galvanised to do it, and preparing contract documents, drilling, taking samples, testing, etc. The procurement process you can and mobilisation you could easily do it within 18 months. But 18 months. It's the bit before that, in terms of the environmental impact and societal impact, takes the most time.
I feared as much. Sigurd, you got a view on this?
Normally, when you have this kind of big civil engineer project, it takes between 10 or 20 years from the start. When I think before the first, when it was mentioned by Egon Vicheldi in the Fairies government building, I think it took 10 years from the beginning to the end of the project, and the wagon faster actually. So they take time to model this thoughts to start it, and
so the bit I'm talking about.
Right, well, look, James Mowatt's got the answer to my concerns about playing one off against the other in terms of island communities, and he says the answer is do all the tunnels at the same time. It's definitely the answer. Andy, from your professional experience, what would be the challenges of that then?
It's bundling them all up together and tending them all together. Yeah, is it possible? Of course it is. My personal view is that, as Sigurd said, it takes a long time for the gestation period of these things. So I think you need to focus on that, and the contractors who are coming to work for or build these tunnels need confidence in SIC or whomever, the vehicle that's procuring them, as an entity, because they want to be paid and they want to be managed in a workmanlike manner. So it may be that building one to start with a promise of others, is a compromise, Alistair. But the contracting community and the people who want to build, possibly operate these things on your behalf, need to have confidence in whoever is overseeing them in the longer term. So that needs to be factored in terms of number of tunnels.
Well, let me just pull this off the top of my head then. Is there an opportunity for a local supply chain here that if we get on and do this, we've got some very good, well-run construction companies in Shetland who have got a long history with big projects through the oil and gas industry as subcontractors. You know, can we get expertise here that we could look at exporting to other parts of Scotland?
Yeah, the first question, I think that's in two parts. First, would a local supply chain be required? It absolutely would, Alistair. No contracting organisation goes anywhere else, for example Shetland or any other rural location or other country, without having a partner or partners in that location. So supply chain would be absolutely essential, which would mean, jobs and boost for local businesses. And there's an element around education as well. I know, maybe just turning very briefly to some of the children's comments. Carrie, Flora, Hannah and Ashley were talking about safety and the environment. And this process would be intrinsically safe and environmental minimal impact, because we would build that in. And Kira and Effie and others were talking about the source of the sense of place that I referenced. And all of that, of course, would be dealt with, Alistair, as well. But perhaps the biggest thing is that the impact on us, or people of my age, will I say, will be minimal from these tunnels.
Yeah.
It's for the young people that these impacts will be greatest. And in this type of work, in civil engineering and geotechnical engineering, there's a huge deficit in the UK now. So there's an educational element to this as well, in terms of future jobs and careers in STEM-related careers such as civil engineering and electrical mechanical engineering as well.
Good point. There's a much wider perspective, and part of the answer, I guess, to those who say that there has to be a Scottish-wide benefit to infrastructure problems, which personally I've always thought was nonsense. It's like this idea of us having to pay for it. I mean, you've got the M8 that runs from Glasgow to Edinburgh. I don't think either Glasgow Council or Edinburgh Council paid for the M8, but that's clearly still an argument to be won. Interesting, looking at the comments that are coming in, the where first question seems to be generating quite a lot of comment. Rory Irvin says, Walsa first, given the longest ferry route and 2 terminals to deal with, which is a nightmare when you're a commuter. He says, totally understand Yelland wanting it first. Who wouldn't? And Gary Robinson chips back in again, saying we should at least be doing them consecutively. Having brought all the equipment to Shetland, you wouldn't want to see it going away, but it was still required. And again, I'll just throw one very quickly to you, Andy. Charlie on YouTube says, are there risks posed to boats or fishers, presumably in relation to the construction phase?
No, I think the environmental impact, as I said in my talk, or the risk to aquatic life and to people using the sea is zero. We're well below the seabed, so no impact.
Now, Willem Paulson, again a long-time advocate, says the Walsa ferry 2 ferry route is roughly twice the length of the Yell route. Walsa has the oldest Shetland ferry in its route. The newest ferry is nearing its replacement date. The ferry terminals are nearing 50 years old. So if Walsa is to be shoved down the line, what service would be provided for Walsa? Ryan, I'll throw that one to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, just very briefly, I mean, I suppose it all amalgamates into one, and it's all around, I suppose, the who gets what tunnel first, etc., etc. And I go back to the situation we have around our roads network. We have a very complex matrix calculation to decide which priority road project that the Shetland Islands Council pursues first. Cllr Road at the moment is number 1, followed by the Landsverk Road improvement number 2. Now I would argue for that, because it's a very important point, to be worked out pretty soon as well. It is an important point whereby you have to work out which would benefit most socioeconomically from an environment perspective, cost effectiveness. It all has to bind together to work out which order the fixed links should be brought in. Obviously, from a council perspective, if you get one in, that frees up vessels to look at improving other services, not just other services where fixed links are viable, other services where perhaps fixed links are not at the present moment, and I'm thinking about Fair Isles, Skerries, Cllr, Papa Stewart, for example, Thomson. So all these are all interlinked and all have a knock-on effect on each other. So just because we look at perhaps if one island comes out on that matrix in terms of being the preferred option for a tunnel in the first instance, that we shouldn't be looking at parallel at service enhancements and improvements for the other islands to keep them going and make sure that they also have an adequate ferry service as well in the meantime.
Right. Now, the text box on the right-hand side of the screen, which I think you should all be able to see, is coming up with some really interesting questions and comments there. Unfortunately, they're going at a speed that I can't actually get a catch of them. But have a look at that, because there are some good questions being asked there, and the question of how this meshes with our current service for ferries also seems to be catching the imagination. Cheryl Jimison asks, what happens if ferries need replacing as they do before the time when tunnels can be built? Does it make the continuing use of ferries inevitable? And I've got a resident in Yale asking or commenting, ferries, if new and required prior to any fixed links, can always be sold off. And he suggests Greece. If you've driven or sailed on Greek ferries, you may know that they might be well pleased to have some of our stock even. So I guess that would come back to Beatrice and Ryan about the question of trying to marry this in to the wider provision, and we do come back to the need for political buy-in from government in Edinburgh and Transport Scotland, really, don't we?
Absolutely, and I mean, it was pretty disappointing with the strategy that was published last week or the week before, and no mention of consideration for tunnels in Shetland at all. So yes, it needs political buy-in, and yes, we need to keep lobbying for it. And I mean, Brian's obviously on the case as well.
Yeah,
Brian, any more thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Beatrice makes a very valid point there, and I go back to the way that that Sigurd has very adequately outlined around how they've gone about financing their fixed links and their tunnels. I touched on it very briefly, very broadly, in terms of an arm's length company perhaps being both publicly and privately owned, potentially being an option for pursuing fixed links within a Shetland context, and that's obviously one avenue that we could possibly go down, and that avenue from a Scottish and British perspective opens up other avenues that aren't available to the Shetland Islands Council or any other local authority. But that doesn't obviously necessarily mean that we should not continue the very, very important discussions that we continue to have with Scottish Government, we Transport Scotland, and I think that we need to broaden that spectrum and start including more of the UK government and the commercial sector in that.
Mm-hmm. Right, Andy, one from Unst again, Gordon Thomson asks, approximately how far back would from present terminals would a new tunnel entrance start? If a tunnel underneath the seabed, then would it be half a mile or more?
It could well be. I'd have to look at the specific geometry and geology, but generally there's a maximum gradient that we would go down at in a tunnel. About 5 or 6%, we wouldn't really want to go much of that, steeper than that, and then we'd define a certain depth below the seabed, and then join the dots up. So it kind of, it's hard to say definitively how far back it would be, but it could be of that order, Alistair.
Mm-hmm. Chris M makes the point that there's 3 bridges and a tunnel opening concurrently in Norway, so it shows, I guess, what can be done when the political buy-in and the determination and the political will is there. And Kevin Hodgson makes the point about the impact it would have on public health regarding getting ambulance to hospital for the North Isles too. Now, William Paulson, we'll just throw this one quickly to you, says that one of the tunnels in Norway was a complicated process of different rock types, which he says is similar to Bresa. I'm wondering, Andy, if you can recall from your Bresa experience if that's a similar issue. Is it a different sort of construction, or would we be looking at the same challenges across Shetland?
We still define in tunnelling terms, engineering terms, the rock across Bresa and Lerwick as hard rock. Hard rock is different than the rocks that Sigurd mined his tunnels through, which were hard volcanics, but the techniques would be the same. And now we've actually done some drilling in the seabed at Lerwick. LPA financed that in 2008 or something like that. Tests, etc.
Look, we are running on time, and I'm conscious of the fact that we've focused all our discussion on Bresa, Walsa, Fettler and Yell, inevitably perhaps, but let's not forget that we have other island communities. So you've got Fair Isle, you've got Fula, you've got Papastur, you've got Skerries, all of which have their own challenges. Maybe going to Sigurd, and I'm not sufficiently familiar with the geography of Faroes, but for those communities that you are not going to be quickly and easily tunnelling, what do you do to make sure that they don't get squeezed out? That the tunnels for these communities could be a cuckoo in the nest.
I think we can divide the discussion up into, you can say, the land-based tunnels, where we are actually at the moment digging two in the Klaksvik area to close Klaksvik, the city of Klaksvik, closer to the other area. We are trying to a small village in Sandoy, digging a tunnel from Husavik to Dal. But they have a road connection to the main area, but not so convenient and not so fast. But we do that. The main thing will change the Faroes when if we will get Suðuroy with the substate tunnel. Then you can actually drive from the southern end to the northern end at one road. So.
Right, I'm going to ask the last question as one that comes from John Fraser, and I think it's a good challenge to us all. What are the next steps? Now, it's a different question for Beatrice, Ryan and myself, but I'm going to put it first to Andy and to Sigurd as people from outside Shetland looking in and having the experience that you do. What would you advise us to be looking at for the next steps of actually taking this from a discussion to a project that eventually gets spades in the ground? Andy, I'll ask you first.
Okay, I think I touched on it in my presentation. I think that it is for Shetland themselves to galvanise around this, if it is in fact something that is wanted, and for SIC to take a case to government. There will always be pressures on finance, and I think in parallel with deciding where you want to build the tunnels first, it is looking at perhaps innovative finance solutions as well. Given that there will be technical engineering studies, etc., to be done, but the first thing is to galvanise around the appetite for change.
And Sigurd, you've presumably seen your own community go through this discussion. Where did you go next after initiating this sort of discussion?
If I were in your position, I think I have been in this market for more than 20 years by the entrepreneur and the build owner. So the technical to build this tunnel is no problem. I think the way to do it is to develop more social, economical arguments for. That's I try to do with my speech today. That's the reason. That's how I think you can bring it further.
Sigurd, thank you very much indeed for that. We're now at 2 minutes to 4, so I am going to have to pull things together here, and I'll ask Beatrice if you can just round things off for us. Beatrice.
In terms of the closing, or did you want me to answer that last question?
No, I think actually we're probably past that point. So that point, if you maybe, yeah, I think we can have that discussion go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And well, obviously a very great thank you to our 3 contributors today, Andy, Sloan, Sigurd and Ryan. It's been absolutely really informative. I think a lot of people will have had a lot of information out of it. We really appreciate the time that you have given to that, and thank you, the 3 of you. Can I also thank the young contributors that we've had from Mid-Yell and Walser? They're the future that it's going to impact on them on the most, whatever the decisions are made. So a special shout out as well to Gary Spence and Fraser Hall, who motivated the children and the young people, and thank you for getting them involved. They were interested in the discussion, and that was really good. And final thank you, I see I've got 30 seconds left. I want to give a shout out to some young students I spoke to last week. They're all on board from the North Isles. They're all on board and would like to see tunnels, and they were highlighting the social activities that they are restricted with at the moment. So they would like to see a bit more movement on tunnels. So a thank you to everybody, and a special thank you to Andy, Stephen and the team at North Broadcast.
Yeah. Well, that being the case, I think we can draw it to a close for the moment there. And I think if we take nothing else away from this, that this is just the start of the discussion, and we will be back to this again and again until we can see final answers on this. So thank you all for taking part. The contributions from the panelists and from the wider viewing public have been fantastic. Thank you all very much, and good afternoon.